One aspect of system design is the interactions with human being. And in this topic, we're going to talk about human behavior and decision making in system modeling. As we know, modeling human behavior is very difficult. Human is inherently complex, driven a lot by emotions, past experiences, and maybe even certain likings. So therefore, in system design, when you want to model human behavior, we got to be guided by certain rules. And one way to look at it is bounded rationality. So rational means being logical, systematic, and looking at really the trade-off between costs and benefits. So a person is therefore considered rational, especially in the economics terms. So bounded rationality means that it's rational within certain boundaries. So the boundaries could be the individuals, could be a company, could be working in an ecosystem. And therefore, when we model human behavior, we therefore look at bounded rationality. And the other way to look at it is rational expectations. So being rational again, but expecting what kind of outcome, which means we expect certain thing to happen rationally. Now, bounded rationality can look at responses from individual or organization. So when you are looking at a person as being rational, how he would react, how he responds, that's individual. And also we can look at organizational perspective. How does an organization react to certain situation? So for example, if you are looking at individual, if the price increase, how does the individual react? If you're looking at organization, if the price increase, how does the organization then decide between the trade-off between the price increase and losing customers? Jay Forrester, who is the founder of the system design movement, said this of bounded rationality. The capacity of the human for formulating and solving complex problems is very small compared with the size of the problem. Let me repeat. The capacity of the human for formulating and solving complex problems is actually very small compared with the size of the problem, whose solution is required for objectively rational behavior in the real world, or even for a reasonable approximation to such objective rationality. So what Jay Forrester is trying to say is that human is actually not very suited for formulating complex problems. We look at things much more in the simple term, but the problems could be big, in the real world could be big, and therefore the objective rational behavior in the real world is actually difficult for human. And therefore we have to simplify it for the human. So human cognitive capabilities are really overwhelmed by complexity. Just think of it. How would you look at, let's say, the relationship between the families and the in-laws, and then manage all of them rationally, right? When it comes to, let's say, deciding when to buy a house, right? Do you consider everybody inside, if every different interest, very different interests, or you just consider your own interest and make a very simple decision? Okay, so human tends to make very, very simple decisions based on the information that is available and make it rationally. So in bounded rationality concepts, humans have selective perceptions based on our history. Second thing is incomplete knowledge of the real world. We don't know everything, right? As some people will say, we have unknown unknowns, okay? Then we have simplified and imperfect mental models of the real world. So we perceive the world based on what is in our brain or is in our mind. and the powers of deductions and inferences are weak and fallible. So let me repeat again, right, of these four factors of bounded rationalities. Humans have selective perceptions, incomplete knowledge of the real world, simplified and imperfect mental models of the real world, and the power of deductions and inference are weak and fallible. So the responses to bounded rationalities. So how do we actually react to our imperfections or our unknowns? And the way to do it is we humans will look at it from habits, routines, and rules of thumbs. Okay, when this happens, do this. When that happens, do that. This is what we usually do. That is the rule of thumbs. That's the routines. Another way of bounded rationality is managing attention. All right. So in a sense, a lot of people actually manage attention because, oh, if I can contain within, the boss will not know, right? I don't want to let the boss know. So I don't want to let the higher authorities know. I just bound it to my own sphere. So managing attention. Or do you want them to know? Okay. The other way is goal formation and satisficing. So you define, you bound your rationalities by saying this is the goal and how am I satisfied by it. The other way is to do problem decomposition and decentralized decision making. That means you take a problem, you decompose the problems in small parts, and then maybe if you do not know the answer, that you decentralize the decision making or you give responsibility to others. So this is how we respond or in the bounded rationality regime. So let's take a look at examples of the habits, routines, and the rule of thumbs. The examples are as like, okay, for example, you are like selling something, you're selling a goods, and the price increases. So you will increase proportionately or you will multiply it by a certain factors. All right, so those are rules of thumbs that you can actually work on. Those are very routine. It can be an algorithm that helps you to make decisions. Managing attentions, examples are access to scarce resources, control of information and data, which we always do, and which actually sometimes we do without thinking in our mind, but it's subconsciously we make decisions that we control information of data to certain people in order to manage their attention. The reporting structures and relationships is how we also manage information flows and attentions. Setting the agenda, and informal networks, giving information to release the information to a certain body or not in order to control the responses. Goal formation and satisficing example is to reduce the complexity of the task. Satisficing behavior which efforts is reduced once a satisfactory performance is achieved. So it's good enough, but you're not trying to optimize. Okay, you just say, okay, it's good enough, and this is where how we can rationalize the response. Problem decomposition and decentralized decision making, divide and conquer technique, specialization rather than general skills, and it's good in that sense because specialization means there is in-depth knowledge in certain areas. And the problems are stand-alone versus integration. So as we try to make rational decision, we decompose and spread it down to the lowest level or the specialized level, where they have they have the in-depth knowledge, stand-alone to make decision, and then we float up later to the central or towards the top for integration and decision making. So modeling decision making can be in a couple of orders. But let's take a look at decisions and decision rules. So decision rules are the policies and protocols specifying how the decision make the processes based on the available informations. And decisions are the outcome of the process. So decision rule is the process and the decision is the final outcome. So therefore, if you say, okay, if I want to create a new product, what are the decision rules? You have to go through market research, you have to go to maybe costing, you have to do the pricing and a whole series of process. And then the outcome is, well, are we going to start product development or not? So that's the modeling the decision-making process. So another example is that in a department store, right? In decision rule could be procedure for making up wholesale costs and adjusting the markup on inventory turnover, competitor pricing. So the decision will be a price of $9.95 from the decision rule made by the store manager, right? So it can be $10, it can be $10.05, but why not $9.95? Because there's certain rules that you will not exceed and make it looks like a bigger number, right? So that's the decision rules that you go through in the whole process. So decision rules in the model embody explicitly or implicitly assumptions about the degree of the rationality of the decision makers and the decision-making process. So decision spectrum can be automatic or choice amongst options or rational expectations of future behavior. So automatic, simple, right? If this happens, this should be the case. Choice among the option. If this happens, there are 3 choices. So the decision maker make the choices. Or if this happens, what is the future behavior of the respondent will be, and then we make the decision based on that. So there are 5 formulation principles for modeling decision making. The Baker criterion, decision rules that are conformity to managerial practice, design and actions conditions that are distinguished, robustness under the extreme conditions or boundaries, and equilibrium should not be assumed. So the Baker criterion, what's that? The input to all decision rules in models must be restricted to information actually available to real decision makers. So it means you don't make wild assumptions. Why? Because the future is unknown to anyone. Actual and perceived conditions differ due to delays, and outcomes of untracked contingencies are unknown. So you make decision based on what is really available and built in the model. Conforming to practice, right? So what you're trying to do is have using historical decision making that decision makes in the past. There are real world counterparts and meanings. So all variables and relationships should relate to the real world. And the units of measure should not use arbitrarily scaling factors. All right? You cannot assume that this is 1 and in 1 million it will happen the same thing. And desired and actual conditions, desired and actual state conditions should be distinguished, and the actual rate of change should also be distinguished. And the decision rules should be robust under extreme conditions. Means it will work. Sometimes we do boundary conditions. So what we'll do is that we have conditions before the boundary, conditions on the boundary, and conditions beyond the boundaries. And when you apply the decision rules, it should be robust under that it work within the boundaries. So equilibrium should not be assumed. Stability may not emerge from the interaction of the elements of the system. So therefore, it is important to model the decision-making process, right? And to see whether it comes to eventually a stability in the systems.